And we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another live episode of the Sesh podcast. I'm James Evans, and unfortunately, for the second episode running, the original host, Mason Shatwell, will not be joining us, I'm afraid. But who needs Mason when you got Mr. Dan Kilpatrick? Dan, how you doing, mate?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And just sort of, as we enter this sort of weird phase of the pandemic, how have the last sort of 6 to 7 months been for you personally?
They've been okay. Yeah, I can't complain, honestly, given how rough some people have had it. But lockdown, I found okay. I was working. A lot of my colleagues were furloughed, but I kept working on the paper. My job kind of boiled down to one question, really, like when will football return? So it was just a variation of that theme almost every day, which did get quite boring. So I was really pleased when football came back. And for a while, it was really, really novel and interesting to cover the games. And it still is anyway, because strange things are happening in the Premier League and beyond, as I'm sure we'll come on to on the pod. So it's been an interesting time. I mean, obviously, I'm really fed up with it now, and it's starting to feel a bit grim, particularly as we go into winter. But look, overall, I think I've been quite fortunate, so I can't massively complain about my lot.
Tell us a little bit about your career. How did you get to where you are now? And, just talk us through your background, really.
Well, I mean, a bit of luck, really. I didn't set out to do journalism, even though I did, or I didn't set out my career at the start of my career to do journalism, even though I did do a diploma in journalism after university. I sort of drifted into doing teaching. But then I'm a Spurs fan, and I had a blog about Tottenham that I did, and I worked for a company that kind of ran a few websites, so I learned how to run a blog. And then from there, I ended up being ESPN's Tottenham reporter, and they hired a load of club correspondents. And so I got into doing journalism with ESPN, and it was a great opportunity. And then after being at ESPN for a couple of years, I joined the Evening Standard, where I've been ever since.
Yeah, as you said, you're with the Evening Standard. Have you ever had to change your writing style to suit your employers, or are they quite flexible with how you publish your content?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, you do have to change it, I suppose. I mean, the Evening Standard, obviously being a free paper, you do have to bear that in mind, I think. And, so you got to bear in mind that you're kind of catering for quite a broad audience, I suppose. So I haven't ever been told by someone, don't write this way or don't write that way. That's never happened explicitly. But I think as a reporter, as a journalist, you have to think about the people you're writing for, and you have to bear that in mind. So while it's never been said, or I've never been put under pressure, I am always thinking, who are my audience here? Am I just writing for Spurs fans on this occasion, or might this be a piece that a wider football fan would read? Am I writing about England? So am I writing, for England fans? So yeah, you definitely have to factor that in.
And moving on to the football, this pains me to say I'm a Chelsea fan right now. So you're a Tottenham fan. What have you made to Spurs' start to the season?
Well, I am a Tottenham fan, but I should say that I now kind of report on the club as a job. So, I mean, it does really change the nature of fandom. I've been fairly encouraged by Spurs' start to the season. I mean, I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but I thought last night's win over Burnley felt like a bit of a backward step to me performance-wise, but ultimately the result was very good. Very satisfying. I think Spurs probably deserve more points than they've got at this point, given the bonkersness of the West Ham game. And then if you remember, they were robbed against Newcastle by the late VAR handball against Dyer. So I think it's been a pretty encouraging start, I have to say. And I don't think I can remember a Tottenham side with more strength and depth than this one. It really is impressive how much depth Mourinho has in the squad. And I think, a big question will be, over Mourinho himself, now he's been given those resources, can he maximise it? Can he turn it into a title challenge, or kind of more pertinently for Spurs, can he get them some kind of silverware? Because that's what everyone at the club wants.
When I speak to Tottenham fans, they completely echo your voice and your opinion. as you know, they sort of broadcasted the documentary on Amazon Prime recently, and you can just sort of see the togetherness in the squad under Mourinho, which kind of wasn't there in a way at times with Pochettino, certainly towards the end of his spell. What do you think's changed since the arrival of Mourinho at Tottenham? Is it the signing of Gareth Bale, or what's he done differently compared to previous managers?
Well, I don't think he's kind of transformed the side he inherited, really. I mean, Spurs carried on being pretty inconsistent and pretty badly flawed last season after he took over from Pochettino, albeit there was an improvement. I think the Tottenham squad that reached the Champions League final was just badly in need of a refresh. It had gone really stale. A lot of players, their hearts weren't really in it. Eriksen, for example, Trippier. A lot of players just weren't the same player they were before. Wanyama, before him, Dembele, Jan Vertonghen. Even Eric Dyer, he wasn't the midfielder he was of a few years ago. Toby Alderweireld, is still a big part of the team, but he's not the centre back he was in 2015-16. So Spurs badly needed some fresh blood, and Mourinho's been given that. The signings from Pochettino's last summer, starting to come good, and Dombele's coming good. Lo Celso's very much came good last season, and Mourinho's been really well backed in the transfer market. Better backed than any other Tottenham manager under Daniel Levy, without doubt. And he very nearly has a squad that, I don't know, I hesitate to say he's got nearly a complete squad, but Spurs almost feel to me in the kind of position Liverpool were before they signed Van Dijk. They're one very, very impressive centre-half away from having a really, really good side. Obviously that they're a few years behind kind of Klopp's Liverpool in their development, but it's genuinely surprising to me how quickly Mourinho's gone from the place he was. Say last time Spurs played Burnley back in March, which was the last time, incidentally, they played in front of fans in this country, when he could barely put together an 11. He certainly had no real attackers left, to the place where he was last night, where there were 9 senior players. He weren't even on the bench. So that's the big difference for me, is he's been backed and he's been able to build a squad that looks like it could challenge on a few fronts.
With this sort of season being such a weird opening start to a campaign, certainly in my lifetime, and that should surely bode well with Tottenham fans. And what are your expectations for the season, considering there's no sort of clear front runner right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really open field, and that should encourage literally everyone, not just Tottenham fans. I think Everton fans should be encouraged. I think Arsenal fans should be encouraged. Chelsea fans like yourself should be encouraged, because it's really there for the taking. I think ultimately Spurs still feel a bit too flawed to mount a serious title challenge. But there is part of me that wonders whether, in these really weird conditions that you've alluded to, these kind of wild, unpredictable games, and the unprecedented circumstances without fans and with the fixture congestion, part of me wonders whether having the kind of game's ultimate successful pragmatist in Jose Mourinho in the dugout could be quite a big advantage for Tottenham. It could be the best kind of season to have Mourinho in charge. I think I wonder whether he's going to be a bit of a plus for them. But yeah, I genuinely think any team that can put together, say, an unbeaten run of 10, 12 games with majority of wins, is going to suddenly find themselves in a really, really strong position, because I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of consistency at the top of the table this year.
And one thing that has stood out for me, certainly as a neutral when watching the Premier League and a Chelsea fan, when it comes to watching Tottenham, it seems to me now that you've got that sort of, you're adding quality in every position. You've got that sort of slight squad depth, although, like you touched upon earlier, you're still that one centre-back short from, potentially pushing on for a title challenge. With regards to potentially like a Europa League finish, where do you sort of expect to end the season there? Would you want the final? Would you want the trophy? Because, say, hypothetically, you don't get the top 5, the only best chance of getting into the Champions League. is through the Europa League and winning it. Would you say, obviously, that would be the main priority for a Tottenham fan, considering you do potentially have the squad depth to compete in all fronts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mourinho is obviously going for the Europa League, and he's on record saying that he wants to win it. And obviously, we all know his character. He wants to win every competition he's in. So I definitely think that is one of the targets for Spurs. I think with Europa League, the key thing is just to get as far as possible without, while rotating the squad, without playing Harry Kane, in any group games, ideally, which he would have obviously had to do in previous seasons and has had to do in previous seasons. I think you'll see on Thursday night he'll make a whole host of changes again for the Antwerp game this week, and just as he did against last week. So the key thing will be to get through the group and then maybe get through an early knockout round or two before you have to start using the likes of Kane and Son properly in that tournament. And then by that point, Spurs will have an idea of what's realistic in the league. They have an idea of whether the title's on or whether it's going to be a scrap for fourth place or whether they might kind of be comfortably ensconced in the top four or whatever. So I think it's a case with the Europa League of really sort of I'm going to sound like a player here, but taking it game by game and just sort of seeing how the league pans out, because as I just said, it's so wild in the league. You might find yourself kind of top at Christmas, and then you got to think, hold on a minute, this is a historic opportunity. We don't want to run Kane into the ground at Ludogorets on Thursday. So yeah, I think they're going for it, but it's going to have to sort of the real targets are still kind of yet to emerge, if that makes sense.
I mean, I saw a crazy stat last night after the Burnley game that just the sort of partnership between Son and Kane is just unprecedented right now. No, they're second to none. I think they've got a combined 29 goals between each other. That's only 6 behind Frank Lampard and Didier Drogba. Is that sort of the key to a trophy-winning side, that great partnership, the pair that understand each other's game well and sort of chip in with both goals and assists? Do you need that partnership to compete on all fronts?
I think to compete on all fronts, you need the squad. So Spurs need them, and then they need Bale, Vinicius, Lamela, Lucas, Steven Bergwijn. They need and have all those attackers, and that will enable them to completely change the front four on Thursday night, which is something they've never really been able to do, at least in my memory when they've been playing in Europe, and certainly not under Pochettino. So that's a massive plus. I think if they are to seriously challenge for the league, then they'll need to keep Kane and Son fit all season. Son, touch wood, tends to avoid muscle injuries, which is a huge strength of his. He missed quite a lot of last season before the shutdown because he broke his arm, which was a bit of a freak kind of fall. But he tends to avoid muscle injuries. Kane, as we know, has had a history of ankle problems and tore his hamstring last year. So that seems less certain. But obviously, you increase chances of keeping him fit for all the league games if he doesn't have to play in the Europa League and the early rounds of the FA Cup, which he has done in previous seasons. So I do think if Spurs, and it remains a big if, are to challenge for the title, it's going to be because those two have been able to play pretty much every league game.
All in all, would you sort of consider a top 4 finish plus a trophy as a successful campaign?
Yeah, I think so. At the start of the season, everyone would have taken that. The key thing is to get this monkey off their backs, which is a lack of silverware since 2008. I think, yeah, so well over a decade now. That is the key thing. That's why Mourinho was appointed. No one's under any illusions that he's kind of been brought in to kind of build a dynasty or be a project manager like Pochettino was. He's been built in just to get them over the line and win a trophy. So if he could do that in his first full season, it doesn't really matter if it's just the League Cup. It would be a big win. But for the business model, for the club point of view, they also need to get back in the Champions League because I think Daniel Levy would not be happy if Spurs had a second consecutive year out of the Champions League. It would really screw with the long-term business plan. So, yeah, the scenario you've just presented, I think the club and most fans would take that now.
We've obviously touched upon Tottenham's start to the campaign. As a sort of neutral Premier League fan as a whole, what have you made to the Premier League season start right now, and who's impressed you the most this season?
Ooh. Well, I mean, it's, as I said just now, it really feels like the most open season. It's funny how wide open it was, and then suddenly this weekend that we've just had, everyone kind of had obviously realised how bonkers it was and just sort of shut up shop, including Mourinho at Burnley, obviously Lampard and Solskjaer against each other in that dreadful game. So it's almost as if all the managers had said, oh, hold on a minute, this has got out of hand. Let's spend a week focusing on defending. So, but these kind of strange trends are going to emerge because the players are playing in conditions that they've never really encountered before. We kind of have no idea yet what the full effects of playing in front of no fans are. We have no idea what the full effects of the lockdown and that extended break were. We have no idea what the real outcome of the truncated schedule is going to be. So we're really stepping into the unknown this season, which I think adds an element of excitement. I hate the absence of fans. I really do. I sort of hate the fact that I'm used to it now. Like I'm going to games and I don't even notice anymore, and that's really troubling, I think. But I think if you just strip that stuff back and just think about the football, then it is a really exciting Premier League season because I just don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. If I was to pick out a team that's really surprised me, it would obviously be Aston Villa. Like I just, I thought they would struggle again, and I know they got turned over by Leeds, which felt like a kind of real crash down to earth. But just before that, the way they were playing, the acquisitions in Watkins and Barkley looked like they were really smart and had taken them to another level, and they were just genuinely good to watch going forward. Not least in that Liverpool game. So they've been the surprise package so far, but I just wonder now whether that might prove a flash in the pan. I hope they'll be able to kind of pick up from Leeds and keep going fairly strongly.
And as you've mentioned, you've been to a couple of games this season, reporting on the live coverage of certain games. What's it like being in an empty arena? Because as you touched upon there, you're dreading going to games without fans. But what's it like as a reporter / journalist?
Yeah, I'm used to it now, which is the funny thing. The first game I went to behind closed doors was Tottenham Man United. It was one of the first games of the restart. I think there were 2 on Wednesday night, and then it was the Friday night match. And it was really, really weird. Like everyone in the press box was like, this is so odd. There's just like this hum from the stadium, like the electricity or something that you can hear at Tottenham the whole time. And obviously you never noticed that kind of thing with supporters. You could hear the shout to the players. It felt very, very surreal, and it felt like you'd never get used to it. And then kind of lo and behold, I hate that phrase, the new normal, but it does just start to feel like the new normal. So now I just don't really notice it because I've done, I've been doing a bit of Millwall and various other London bits here and there. So I must have done more than 20 games behind closed doors now, and you just don't take a huge amount of notice after a while. It just becomes the norm, but it is very surreal, and it'll be. There's kind of moments now where you notice it, like the Spurs West Ham game, the 3-3. I really noticed it because Bale obviously came on for his debut, and that would have been a moment where the Spurs were 3-0 up against West Ham, and Bale coming back. It would have been a glorious moment with fans, and then obviously their equaliser in the last minute of stoppage time would have been an unbelievable moment, and there would have been proper limbs in the away end. So there are certain moments where you're like, I really notice it now, but sort of the rest of the time you're kind of like, well, I'm used to it.
certainly as a football fan, we talk about, what's next in terms of the fixtures, and so we're scratching our heads as to how we could get 3 points away, because, say if Chelsea go up to Sheffield United, we're thinking, the home crowd's certainly going to be a factor in the outcome of the result and where we're going to get the 3 points. But now that obviously there are no fans in attendance, there's sort of no pressure for any side to go home or away, because there's no fans to sort of get behind your back, and there's no sort of the 12th man, if you will. So with the lack of fans, does it play a big factor in the outcome of a result?
Yeah, I think it does. I haven't actually got or seen the statistics on the kind of number of away wins since the restart, but I imagine it's higher. I know that briefly in the Bundesliga, no one could win at home for love nor money when it restarted. I think that there were just loads of kind of interesting little quirks that will emerge with time. I mean, someone said to me on Twitter this week, did I think Spurs' new signings had kind of settled more quickly because there was less pressure from the crowd or less expectation? And it's not something I'd really thought about, but then, you can well imagine that if you are a new signing and, as nice as it is to play in front of the buzz of a new crowd and, be welcomed onto the pitch by 60,000 people, that obviously brings with it, a certain pressure. For someone like Carlos Vinicius, who's the new striker Spurs signed, and he assisted 2 in the Europa League midweek, and he looked very relaxed and comfortable. And of course, he might have done that in front of fans, but then, perhaps the fact that it just felt like a bit of a training session for him, would have been a big plus. So I just don't know, but I think there are lots of little factors like that eventually we might say, oh yeah, he was great when there were no fans, and he's terrible now, or vice versa. And I just think it will be having an effect on everyone in slightly different ways.
What have you made of Liverpool's title defence so far? Because obviously they've lost Virgil van Dijk recently for what looks to be a long-term injury, and they're scoring goals, but they're also conceding and shipping in a lot of goals. So what do you make of their season so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, Liverpool's not problems, because they haven't really got that, let's not exaggerate it, but after they won the title, they slightly lost that air of invincibility, didn't they? They had that really poor result against City, and they did lose a couple of games, which was totally understandable. But I think for Liverpool, that kind of aura was really important for them, and it was a big factor. I mean, just to take Spurs again, because I'm most familiar with them, when Mourinho played them at home last season, he played like a back five and 2 right backs, and obviously that's quite Mourinho, but there was just this kind of feeling that Spurs didn't have any kind of chance against them, and that they were this generational, unbelievable team. And I'm not saying they weren't. I'm saying that was very, very useful for Liverpool. Now, I think that invincibility has slipped with the Villa game. Teams look at them and say, they are vulnerable now. We can beat them. And that probably started at the end of last season, but it was certainly cemented by the Villa game. And it's obviously been exacerbated even further by losing Virgil van Dijk. So while I think they're still probably the favourites for the title, they're my favourites for the title anyway. And they're still an unbelievable side, particularly going forward. I think teams will look at them now without that same fear they had for most of last season. And I think just psychologically, that could be, a pretty important factor for their opponents.
With the sort of Christmas period around the corner away, because we're entering the end of October, early November, I know certainly Tottenham, they've got some difficult fixtures in November. I think you've got the likes of City, Liverpool and Chelsea to come. What are your expectations going into the sort of Christmas period? Because now that, as I touched upon, Van Dijk's injured, surely you should be a lot more confident going into this sort of period now that they've lost their sort of key man, and City are there for the taking as well, because they seem to have their flaws right now. And even with Chelsea, I mean, defensively we're getting better, but we're not scoring goals. So surely that gives you sort of some confidence going into the November/Christmas period.
For Spurs, you mean specifically?
Yeah, for Spurs.
Specifically,
For Spurs.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the next two games Spurs have got are Brighton and West Brom. So obviously that they'll be looking at 6 points from them, and then as you said, I think there's a run where it's City, Arsenal, and Chelsea. I'm not sure which order that's in, but yeah, I mean, yeah, that as you said, that might be a really good barometer of whether we're looking at another top 6 finish, a top 4 finish, or even a title challenge. So yeah, I think Spurs can be optimistic. Again, it depends on Kane and Son staying fit, but I think teams will be looking at them and they'll be worried. I do think the key thing for Tottenham is that they keep playing to their strengths and not worrying too much about the opposition's strength, which is something Mourinho does more than most managers. I mean, against Burnley last night, he very much did not play to Tottenham's strength. He set up to contain, almost as if he was more fearful of Burnley than he was kind of backing his own attack. I think it will be different for most other games because Burnley is a fairly unique place to go in the Premier League at the moment. But yeah, it would be great if Spurs could go against go to the likes of Chelsea and Liverpool and have a go at them, because obviously I think with all of the top teams in the league, certainly Chelsea, Liverpool, and City, their weaknesses are at the back. They're not going forward, and Spurs have to play to those weaknesses because their strengths are going forward, as well. So, yeah, it will be interesting, and I think we'll get an idea. We should have an idea, kind of by, as you said, by mid December, kind of what everyone's goal is for the season.
Come the sort of early parts of 2021 and sort of coming towards the end of the Premier League season, say if Tottenham were competing on all fronts, they were close title challengers behind potentially Liverpool, Manchester City. Do you reckon Jose Mourinho would sacrifice the Europa League in order for that Premier League push? Because if they've got genuine belief that they can compete for the title and it's there for the taking, would he sacrifice the Europa League for it?
I don't think Mourinho is the kind of manager that sort of sacrifices anything. I think, as I said, like if Spurs get to the point where they're genuinely in a title challenge and there's a kind of historic chance to win the Premier League for the first time, then he's going to prioritise that, I'm sure. But equally, he's been in the Europa League twice. He's won it twice. He's got a proud 100% record to maintain there. I think only one coach has won it 3 times, Unai Emery, although Trapattoni, going back a few years, won the UEFA Cup a couple of times and maybe won Europa League or all 3 UEFA Cups. So, yeah, I mean, Mourinho is going to go for everything, but he's not. He's smart enough to know that Spurs haven't had many genuine shots at the league title, and if it's there for the taking in this kind of wild, crazy, unpredictable season, he's obviously going to try and go for it.
Since the return of the Premier League after the pandemic, I know we're still in the midst of the COVID-19. Do you think that the Premier League has been smoothly run since the return? Or are there some
What do you mean in terms of governance, or how do you mean? Oh, well, I mean, no is the short answer. I mean, they've obviously dropped the ball massively with this PPV arrangement, and it's created a kind of kickback to the point where I think even if they lower the price, and I know they had a meeting today, I have been off today, so I'm not sure whether anything's come out of that about a new price. There was certainly suggestions it was going to be lowered. But I think even if people, even if they lower it now, the damage is done. They've kind of put their greed out there already, and for a lot of people it was less the price, more the principle. So even if they lower it, I think that was a poor move from a PR point of view. And I think it's going to be hard to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube, as it were. Generally speaking, it's obviously taken a fairly monumental effort to get the league restarted under all the new conditions. and all the rule changes from last season, the 5 subs, for example, that kind of thing. And it did take an unprecedented kind of effort of collaboration between the clubs, and the clubs are effectively the Premier League. But then since then, it's felt like there's that kind of spirit of collaboration is seemed to kind of slip, and we've had the Project Big Picture proposals. That there's apparently ongoing conversations about this European breakaway Super League, and it all leaves a kind of fairly bad taste, doesn't it? Because it just looks like the big clubs are trying to screw over the smaller clubs, and that kind of spirit of collaboration that got football going again, albeit they had to do that because of economic reasons, but still there doesn't seem to be that same kind of we're all pulling in the same direction vibe that there was back in April and May when everyone was talking about the restart.
That was sort of my follow-up question, as you touched upon just there with the Project Big Picture. What do you make of it in general? Does it sort of widen the gap between the big teams and the smaller sides?
Yeah, I mean, it was just really a power grab disguised as a rescue package. The aim was to strengthen or consolidate the power of the Premier League Big Six, while football was on its knees and desperately needed. Well, the EFL was on its knees and desperately needed the money, and would support those kind of measures. So I was actually on holiday the week that broke, and then subsequently died because the Premier League clubs decided not to do it. So I didn't have any conversations with anyone really about it, and I wasn't closely following the ins and outs of it. But it seemed to me on the surface to be just that, a power grab, disguised as a rescue package for the game.
With the summer window just gone, who out of all the 20 sides in the Premier League have sort of made the best signings in a way?
Well, as I've already touched upon, I think Spurs have done very good business. It's kind of been striking how quickly all the new signings have made an impact. Spurs generally have made signings that have taken a year or even longer to settle. You look at Ndombele, for example. He's taken a year to get up to speed, whereas Vinicius, Hart, Doherty, Reguilon, Højbjerg, they've all already made a difference on the pitch and improved the squad. None of them look like players that are going to take a year to get to grips with the team. So that's been good. I've been pretty impressed with Chelsea's new signings so far. I mean, the obvious, the obvious question is, should they have done more on the defence and spent less on the attack? It does feel a little bit top heavy. It does feel like there's a hell of a lot of reliance on Thiago Silva to kind of sort everything out back there. Who else? I mean, Liverpool was very understated, but Thiago, could really be a game changer in terms of the way they play. And as I've already mentioned, Villa. I was impressed by Villa's business. I mean, I think they've made some really smart signings. Ollie Watkins. I suppose the jury's still out on him at Premier League level, but he's already got a hat trick and looks like he's made a pretty good start. And I think Barkley looks an inspired bit of business, just what they need, and really good link up with Grealish, and he could well be one who sort of forces his way back into the England squad by the end of the year.
With regards to Tottenham signings, who's impressed you the most? Because I've seen a lot of Tottenham fans rave about Højbjerg, and I know I don't watch them on a regular basis, that's the same as you in particular, but from what I've seen in brief snippets, he just seems to be getting better game by game. So who do you say is the best sort of signing that came through the door at Tottenham? Yeah,
I'd agree with you on Højbjerg. I think I'm most excited by Reguilon, though. Just almost kind of forgotten what it's like to have a really quality attacking left back. And he just looks like he's ready-made for the Premier League, really. He's combative, he's quick, he gets stuck in. He's still a bit raw defensively, but he's got a good final ball as well. I think he looks like a steal at 27 million, given the kind of premium on top fullbacks. You only have to look at like what Guardiola's spent on left backs alone to know that you know they're not that easy to come by. And Reguilon definitely looks like someone who could more or less slot into any team in the Premier League. So I'm quite. I know Man U were interested, but I'm quite surprised Spurs managed to kind of do that deal so easily. I would say him. I mean, Bale's obviously the most exciting one, and we haven't seen much of him yet. But time will tell on that.
What does sort of Gareth Bale bring to the table? I mean, it's going to take a lot of effort and doing for him to sort of get back to any sort of top form as he showed in his later Tottenham days and in the early Real Madrid days. But based on his sheer presence in the backroom staff and outside of the pitch, is this sort of personality needed in the dressing room like Tottenham?
Well, when he came in, he did an interview and he really talked up his kind of winning mentality, saying he's kind of been to Spain and won everything and he can bring that to the dressing room. So there's definitely an element of that. I don't think Bale is a kind of leader really, though. I think in terms of kind of leadership, probably Højbjerg, for example, would bring more. Even Joe Hart might bring more in terms of a voice in the dressing room. I don't think Bale's that kind of character who's going to go in and kind of yell at his teammates and give an inspiring team talk. But just, again, it's almost like an aura thing. He's been the guy who's been decisive in 2 Champions League finals and won 4. He's been, for a time, arguably, in the top 3 players in the world and one of the most decisive kind of clutch players on the planet. And
obviously with the summer window... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, my headphones ran out of battery, so I'm going to... If there's an echo, let me know.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah.
I think you were good right now.
Cool. But yeah, I think Bale... it's more about his kind of presence and aura than it is about sort of going in and whipping people into shape.
Do you think he'll get the best out of the attackers then in that department? Because they're playing with like such a world-class name in Gareth Bale, they'll want to step up their game in terms of the forward line.
Do I think Mourinho will get the best out of...
No, do you think Gareth Bale will get the best out of the attackers simply because they're playing around in the starting 11 as a world-class name in Gareth Bale?
I think it's more a case of will Harry Kane get the best out of Gareth Bale? Does that make sense? I mean, if you look at kind of how many assists Kane's got for Son already, and the type of role he's playing, where he's dropping deeper into the 10 role, and effectively being Spurs 10 and 9 at once, and being their primary playmaker. I think the question will be, can get Bale slot in with Kane and Son, because at the moment he's only the 3rd sort of biggest superstar at Spurs, really. Those two are, they're so on form that they're kind of ahead of him. So it's up to him to, prove that he can play as the 3rd man in that line. And in the last 2 games, I think it's been Bergwijn and Lucas, and Lamella's doing a good job as well. So there's obviously a fair amount of competition there. So yeah, I think a big part of it will be how Bale interacts with those two.
With regards to all the incomings in the Premier League, who did you tip to flop at the start of the season and has gone on to exceed your expectations? Because I'll tell you mine now. I thought James Rodriguez was going to flop.
Oh, that's a pretty good shout. Yeah, that's a pretty good shout. He seemed like that one of those kind of classic sort of Everton signings that you thought almost. I know he's a complete level above, but kind of like Moise Kean, where you just thought, have they just bought someone from a big club? Because he's available, but he's been great. I mean, I watched him on the first day live at Spurs, and it was his first Premier League run out, and he was just absolutely running the show. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good shout. Who did I think would flop? I mean, going a bit further back now, I thought Pulisic was very average when I first saw him. The first few times I saw him, he just looked like he was incapable of doing anything apart from sort of running in a very straight line. He looked very kind of one-dimensional, sort of old school winger, and he's been great. Like I think he's really, he's really made the sale of Hazard look like a great bit of business for Chelsea, which you would not have said a year ago. So I know that's a historic one, but I think I've definitely been proved wrong on that.
And in the Premier League as a whole, who do you sort of tip to go down? Because there's sort of out as of right now, there are two clear candidates for me. I'm probably going to go for Fulham and West Brom. But who, as the sort of three, who do you think that will go down this season?
Yeah, Fulham, West Brom, and I think I slightly fear for Brighton. I think they've got a good manager, but I wonder if they're going to score enough goals. Who else? I think at this moment in time, given that I don't think Newcastle will be okay. Obviously, yeah. Villa, well out of it at the moment. I think they'll be okay. I think West Ham are well out of it. I'm sort of struggling to think Leeds are going to be fine. Yeah, I would fear for Brighton. I think at this point in time, I think Burnley are going to pull themselves out of it, but I think that will depend on kind of keeping Sean Dyche. It feels like maybe there's some disharmony in the sort of upper echelons of the club between Dyche and the boardroom, and if he goes with that squad, you suddenly think, are they going to have enough?
And out of the two I mentioned earlier with Fulham and West Brom, who do you think will get sacked first? Is it one of them two within Bilic or Parker, or could it be somebody else?
Well, Bilic was saying last night he was going to walk away, so he might walk before he's sacked. Probably Scott Parker, I would think, at this moment in time, because I think Fulham came into the league with loftier ambitions than West Brom. I think West Brom are kind of know their sort of place as a yo-yo club, really, and that they probably weren't expecting anything particularly spectacular, whereas I think Fulham kind of have ideas above their station a little bit, and I think they might have come into the league hoping obviously hoping to do better than they have done so far, but I like Scott Parker, but I think he's probably under a bit of pressure.
Moving away from the Premier League and moving on to England, next summer, obviously the Euros. With England having such a plethora of talent right now, how far can they go next year?
Well, I think they can win it, and I think they should be looking to win it. I think with the players at Southgate's disposal, there's no reason England can't go one better than at the World Cup. I've been slightly kind of dismayed by the recent England performances since the restart, really, or since this season, I guess. It hasn't been particularly encouraging, and suddenly, you think, hold on, we're in a much worse position than we were in March, like when most of the squad looked settled and everyone was pretty optimistic, and there weren't really any questions about sort of Southgate's decisions or management. Now I think there are questions, and there does seem to be a almost a sort of discipline problem in the squad as well. So I'm a lot more worried about England now than I was when I thought the Euros were going to be last summer.
Is he the man to lead England forward going into Qatar 2022 as well?
I really like Gareth Southgate. Like, I just think he's a good bloke, and he I think he's very good at facing the media, which is a really, really important role for an England boss. Arguably one of the most important. I think just the big question is whether he's kind of tactically astute enough to go the distance in a major tournament. And he's obviously trying to develop these different systems. He's flipping between the back four and the back three at the moment to try and ensure that England have a plan B. He's trying different personnel in different kind of positions, and there's been a lot of experimentation, which you could say is encouraging, but the overall sort of package of those changes and ideas has been quite a conservative one, and it looks like England have been trying to avoid defeat, rather than win games, which concerns me. So I do like Southgate a lot. I'm a fan of his, but I worry that he's maybe not the kind of master tactician that you need to win the biggest trophies.
I've certainly from the international breaks, I see the whole sort of Safegate trending on Twitter. Do you sort of agree with those opinions?
I've missed that. To be honest, what's that? He's too safe.
Yeah, very very safe, and we sort of lack creativity going forward, and we're just so set on the sort of defensive side of football.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been an element of that in the last few games, isn't there? I mean, again, I was on holiday I normally do England, but I missed the last two games. So the two Nations League matches. I went to the Wales game at Wembley, and then I missed Denmark and
Belgium, I think.
Belgium. Yeah, so I can't comment with authority on them, but I saw the lineups obviously in the highlights, and yeah, it has been too safe, and he's been playing kind of two holding midfielders, Calvin Phillips and Declan Rice, for example, in front of a back three, and you just feel like you don't need that level of protection. You should be trying to get England's most talented players on the pitch, and they are generally in the final third. Sancho didn't start one of the games, I believe, which felt disappointing. And then there's, I suppose, the Jack Grealish thing, which the kind of Grealish Mount sort of conundrum, which I sympathise with Southgate on that, because Mount's a pretty underrated player, I think, and he's a very effective player. But it did feel strange that Grealish was so good against Wales, and then didn't get another opportunity. He looks like a player that England don't really have a similar player to him, and he looks like he'll make a difference. So it's a shame that Southgate seems hesitant about him.
If you were in Southgate's shoes tomorrow, who starts the first game of Euro 2021? Providing everyone's obviously sort of on form.
Well, not Pickford. Well, I mean, it's a tricky one, because again, like if you go back to sort of March, I think it was clear who the two centre halves were going to be. It looked like it was going to be Maguire and possibly Stones, or if he wasn't playing enough, then Gomez. Maguire's had a really difficult start to the season. Gomez has had a really difficult start to the season, and Stones, can't get a look in at City at all. So suddenly that's a really big question. Eric Dyer's come back into his thinking. I think the jury's still out on whether he's a top centre half. So I think there are only there are a few positions that are nailed on for me. I think Chilwell's obviously one, because there's not a lot of competition there. I think Trent is one, because I think he's the best right back. Although Southgate likes Trippier and Kyle Walker. I think obviously Kane, Sterling, and Sancho in the three, and then beyond that, I think the kind of rest of the spine of the team is pretty pretty open at the moment, and that's part of the problem for England.
And obviously moving away from England, who do you on? I don't want to really rub it in with Tottenham, but I know you're not in the Champions League this season. Who do you tip to win the Champions League on a whole? I'm not great on European football. I don't tend to watch a huge amount of it, so I'm not gonna try and blag this and say I know what's going on. I mean, I know that Barca are in absolute shambles, and Real Madrid aren't much better. So I guess it's sort of hard to look beyond Bayern Munich again, isn't it? At least if you're saying if you're thinking outside these shores, I think Liverpool and City will do pretty well again. They're just massive clubs with really good squads, so I can't see how they won't get to the latter stages. But if I was to kind of pick an obvious candidate right now to win it, it would have to be Bayern, as boring as that is. During a typical transfer window day, I know we've obviously seen, I'm just going to throw a name out there, Fabrizio Romano go out on a day-to-day basis, breaking that news on a sort of typical daily routine in the transfer summer/winter window. What's your day like when reporting on the breaking news?
That's a good question. Well, look, I don't do what Fabrizio Romano does, and stand outside hotels waiting for football agents. But yeah, I mean, it varies day to day, really. I mean, I suppose the nice thing about kind of being on a club correspondent is that, or primarily a club correspondent, because I do stuff outside Spurs. But the nice thing is you can, you just focus on one club, and you can try and speak to the press officers at the club to find out what's going on, and they don't always want to tell you everything. If not, you can maybe try and speak to some contacts you might have at the club, or some agents of players who might want to help you with stories, or get bits of information out there. And every story differs really. Frankly, a lot of the time, you'll read about the story like everyone else, but then you might pick up the phone to someone and say, have you heard this? Is this true? Can you guide me on this info? And then you'll find out pretty quickly whether there's something to it. Sometimes no one knows what's going on, and the club will just announce something that has happened previously. So yeah, it really varies, but I wouldn't particularly want to be like Fabrizio trying to cover every single transfer. In Europe, it's quite nice to just have a more of a focused remit.
I'm sure you've heard of the recent tragic story of Jeremy Whiston. Do you think that the Premier League clubs need to do more to help release players find a new club?
I don't know a huge amount about the story. I did see the announcement yesterday on Twitter. I honestly don't know enough about it to sort of be able to say that it was a massive failing or anything like that. I mean, I remember when I was at university, actually, I did do a story about kind of players who I spoke to a couple of players who were trying to make it as pros and had been released from academies when they were younger. And it is a sort of tough world for players that spend their whole youth thinking they're going to be professional footballers, and then 18, 19, they finally haven't made it. And I think, there's obviously a massive duty of care from clubs that kind of, invest in these players and bring them on, and then let them go. But it's not something I know a huge amount about.
Just two more from me. I think one of them being a question from Mason. What's your favourite sporting moment in history?
I think probably. In terms of things I was there at, I'm gonna narrow it down to that criteria, and that would have been the Ajax game, Champions League game. I'm not saying it's my favourite sporting memory per se, because I remember, I remember England winning the Rugby World Cup and stuff like that. Which was obviously a great moment, but the Ashes of 2005, stuff like that, they stick in my mind more. But in terms of his being at the ground, it was incredible to witness that. And then the scenes at full time and after the final whistle were just great. So that's kind of my favourite memory of something I've been to.
One final question for me. I'm in my third year at Portsmouth University, and for those who have aspirations of becoming a journalist or successful in the sports media industry, what would your advice be to those?
I think I'm sort of stumped here. There's lots of things. There's lots of things I want to say. There's lots of things I want to say. I think the main thing is just to work really hard and kind of hustle. It's a really saturated industry. People, if you're sitting on the sofa, the Telegraph aren't going to email you and say, "Hi mate, are you up for going to the League Cup third round this afternoon?" It's just not going to happen. You've got to put yourself out there. Get social media accounts. Hustle, get email addresses, go to games, pick up the phone, put yourself out and about, and just work really hard. That's not necessarily what I did, so I feel like a bit of a charlatan saying that. But there are other ways to do it. Like having a blog, for instance. But I think if you really want to be a sports reporter, it is a tough industry to get into, and the key thing is to sort of put the yards in, I suppose.
Perfect. No, that's all for me. That wraps up all my questions. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time, and all the best for the near future. And I'm going to be a keen eye on. I'll keep a key eye on your pieces.
Cool. Thanks very much, mate. It's a pleasure to come on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, mate. Take care. Look after
Yeah,
yourself.
okay. Bye now.
Bye.